Thank you, Chair. Thank you to everyone for coming in today and for the detailed information as well. I'll pick up on that point from Deputy Donoghue. In terms of the business cases that we've received from departments, justice and social protection are excellent compared to the rest. A lot of detail. You can really get into it and understand what the rationale for the particular allowance, whatever it may be. Yeah, I just wanted to ask, if I may, Mr. Purcell, just to begin with, the review of allowances that's currently taking place that Minister Howland has asked for, the 88 priority allowances that he's looking at now. How many of those are in the prison service?
We've got the indication from the department of a number that are not going to apply to new beneficiaries, and at the moment, what we now have to do is we have to look at, you know, which allowances then that are currently being paid, you know, where that's going to go. But I suppose there are a number of issues in relation to that. The first one is, you know, the first challenge is to determine which of these allowances among those that have been abolished for the new beneficiaries but still apply to current beneficiaries, how they can be dealt with. The second would be to look at what the ones that the Department of Public Expenditure and Reform have said that would remain in payment but yet would be subject to modification. You know, what exactly those modifications would be. And I suppose overlapping or covering all of that is doing that in consultation, given the fact that the exercise has to be carried out within the parameters of Croke Park. And if there's to be any agreement on that, it'll have to be done on that particular basis.
The Minister has prioritised 88 allowances for existing beneficiaries that he wants to look at. I'm just wondering the number of the 88.
Those, there's 17 in relation to the 17 on the list of 88 that are being prioritised for elimination. Yeah.
And is there a separate list to that? Will you ask them to draw up your own list then for a further round?
Well, they've indicated that yes, we shouldn't rule anything out in terms of looking at this. So that exercise will then have to take place, and as I said, that'll be the challenge. Will be how exactly you proceed with that.
From the 17, you're then drawing up another list of an amount of allowances that will be looked at through this arrangement.
We'll have to look at. We'll have to
number yet. We heard yesterday from Education, I think, that it was 80 that they'd
We're probably looking at across, we're a figure, I think, of roughly about 30 right across the entire justice area.
That's not just 10 prisons, it's across justice. Okay.
Right across.
And sorry, so the figure of 17 in the 88 is for justice or for prison?
No, that's justice? Right across. Right across. But 17 of those refer to the prison service.
Sorry.
17 from the list of 88 refer to the prison service. Yeah, and there are other ones then that Sorry, I just want to be clear about this before I give you. Yeah, the 17 on it, but some of them would be duplicated. Again, for example, one example would be a plain clothes allowance, which is paid to different people, that sort of thing. I think you have it on the screen there.
So these are the 17 that are part of the 88 priority?
Yes.
Okay, and they're related to the prison service, but some will carry over to other areas of justice?
Yeah, in total there's about 30 altogether that will...
The list of justice has drawn up 30 of its own list to bring them back to the Minister?
Yeah.
With your own recommendations as to what's happened to each?
Yes, and it'll depend on, as I said, in relation to some of the issues where modifications are required, we'll be getting responses back from Public Expenditure and Reform on those ones.
Okay, and do we have a timeline for that, or February was indicated previously?
The review, I suppose, I think there's been initial discussions on this, but it'll carry forward. There's a deadline, I think, of February 2013.
And have you got a costing for those 30, that list of 30, what the cost is?
Not yet, not yet.
Wouldn't be too difficult to...
No, I mean, some of them would be relatively easy, to give in terms of those that perhaps are covered those allowances that wouldn't be paid to new beneficiaries, for example, we could give a list of the existing cost of those allowances, I suppose. But then again, it depends on what the outcome will be.
But I imagine you've got to give an upfront existing costs before you enter into any kind of discussion on what's to happen.
And we can certainly give you that.
Yeah, if you would, I'd appreciate it. Thanks. If I could just return then to the issue we've been discussing around 2005 and when that agreement was made with the annualised hours. What was the pay bill for the prison services then at that stage, prior to this new agreement?
What was the...
For salaries, how much we were paying, separate to the overtime bill?
What was the overtime bill?
Separate to the overtime bill, what was the
Separate to the
basic pay
overtime
bill?
I haven't got that off the top of my head, but we can get that for you.
I'm just interested to know, I mean, you said the overtime bill was 66 million.
Yeah.
So what would have that been then?
As a percentage of the total pay bill, yeah, we can get you that. It probably wouldn't have been that far off where we are now, because where we are now is with a reduction of roughly 300 staff from where we would have been at the time. But look, rather than do it, in terms of numbers,
the pay bill for the prison service.
The pay bill for 243 million now.
But that's since reductions in staff of about 300.
Yeah. But we can get you exact figures dating back to 2005.
Overtime would have been quite a significant.
It was quite a significant element of the overall pay bill. Yeah, very significant.
In terms of that agreement, we had this new allowance system come into play, which was the additional hours, nighttime, Christmas Day, weekend, and public holidays. Is that correct? When you agreed the annualised hours, you agreed a new allowance system.
There was no, not an entirely new allowance system. There was a new allowance system that referred specifically to the additional hours. They're the 13 different allowances that are incorporated, I suppose, under the broad heading additional hours allowances.
Yes. And that doesn't include then the nighttime allowance or the Christmas Day allowance or the weekend allowance or the public holidays allowance? No.
It would include some element of payment for those, but there would be separate premium payments that would apply to Saturday, Sunday, public holiday working as well.
Okay. I'm just trying to figure out where that 30 million saving then would be reflected. The 30 million saving for the overtime.
Where you got it from? Yeah. You got it from the reduction, as I said. I suppose I don't know whether you were here when I was talking to Deputy Ross.
I was for Deputy Ross, but
yeah.
not for Deputy DC. So
the way it actually came into being was that the structure of the way the prisons operated in terms of the tasks and the deployment of staff to various tasks was reviewed for each prison. And that task review delivered a structure that enabled the prison system to run with a reduced level of, enabled the system to run with the total number of additional hours based on 4 bands, raising from a 0 band right up to 360. I think it was roughly a 0 band, 110 hours, 240, 360 or something like that. And so the review of the tasks within the prison delivered a structure that enabled the prisons to run with those additional hours, so that you weren't in a position where you had to rely on overtime to cover the shortfalls.
If I look at, say, at the books, would I see that this figure of 66 million in overtime in 2005? In 2006,
I would see 30 million.
Yeah. But would I see any corresponding increase then on the allowances payment side?
Yes, you will, because there was an operational allowance that's there, and that was roughly 8% of basic pay. And then the additional hours, which would be, I can't remember the total, I think
3.5 million is the cost.
33 million is the current cost of the additional hours, and the operational allowance, I think, is roughly 10 million maybe.
Okay. So overtime would have decreased by 30 million?
Yes.
But then would we have seen any increases in terms of allowance paid, in terms of that figure increasing?
The net gain with all of this was the 30 million gain.
So it wasn't just a simple,
If you think about it, it wasn't a 30 million, 65 million was gone.
Yeah. Okay. So the overtime bill.
The net gain was about 30 million, and that's been delivered that's continued on an ongoing basis since then. And in fact, the actual amount may be higher because of because overtime would have continued to cost us more, depending on what the basic rates were.
Effectively, overtime doesn't exist anymore.
Overtime is gone.
Okay. But when you've got such a high figure for overtime, obviously it points to two things possibly. One is the structure in place isn't effective in terms of delivering the best the best spend of the money with the people you have. And so you make this arrangement that you do to bring in the additional hours allowance for the additional hours that staff will have to work. But did you consider bringing in new staff?
Additional staff?
Such a huge amount of money going on overtime, and overtime is paid at a higher rate than normal time. Would you not consider hiring more people?
Well, I suppose to some extent, hiring more people doesn't necessarily deal with the overtime problem. I know the point you're making, and on a very basic level, if you've got X number of staff and you've got X Y budget, if you have X plus 100 staff, it reduces the overall cost if you get them in that way. But what you have in those circumstances is you end up with additional staff. I mean, to be honest, given the nature of the work within the prison system and the fact that it is 24/7, there are advantages in having facilities that to cover particular peaks and valleys, that you have a more flexible system. Whereas if you go down the route of getting in additional staff, you lose some of the flexibilities that are required. And the reality is, in the circumstances we currently find ourselves in, you certainly wouldn't be looking at recruiting extra staff.
But in 2005, someone must have come to the table and said, look, we actually need more staff here because we're spending far too much of our budget on overtime to fill these hours, these gaps. So we need to get something to do that. Why don't we hire more staff? Because it's going to be cheaper than continuing to pay as we are now, say more than 10% of the actual salary budget just to cover the additional hours. I mean, someone must have come and said it's a cheaper option to get more people into the system.
Well, I suppose if you were just able to unilaterally impose a system, you might well have something like that. But if it's
maybe people who are already working in the prison system didn't want any more staff coming in.
No,
when you talk about unilaterally imposing,
not necessarily. I can't, as well. I can't remember the exact nature of the discussions. A lot of the original consideration of this would have dated back. I mean, they first started examining this particular issue in the mid-90s, and there was an awful lot of consideration and negotiation actually went in. I think the actual period of negotiation probably lasted about 3 or 4 years.
Was there resistance, though, from those working in the prison system?
Well, I
to
suppose,
bring in new staff because it would have meant a reduction in overtime pay for them.
Well, when the negotiations took place, it was with the specific intention of getting rid of overtime, not even reducing it, but getting rid of it. But we had to replace it with something that would deliver the service that was required to run a prison. So, but again, what I'm saying is that it had to be done, and it was done through negotiation and agreement. That sometimes there are ways of dealing with things, and if you just come in and unilaterally say, right, we're doing that, but what will happen then? There'll be, are you going to have a fallout? Are you going to have industrial action? You're going to have strikes within a prison. So what had to be done was we had to do this by agreement in order to move this in the direction it went.
That option was not considered as being conducive to getting an agreement, bringing in additional people.
I think there would have been substantial issues, I presume, in relation to changes in rosters and that sort of thing that that would have created issues. But as the point I made earlier, that over time, additional hours, those type of arrangements, they're very good in terms of dealing with peaks and troughs of demand in particular areas, where having additional staff doesn't necessarily give you the flexibility to respond to your particular needs. And in a 24/7 operation, you're never going to get to a point when you can simply deliver by having staff on basic levels of, a basic.
No, I take that point, that you do need to have flexibility. You need to be able to say, look, we need you to do this extra shift or do whatever. But when it's such a large figure and a large percentage of the basic pay bill, you would assume that you would also, in tandem with that, bring in new people as well, because that would significantly reduce the demand for those additional hours on the service at the same time. You'd still get the flexibility, but you'd also have extra people coming in to bring down the basic kind of amount of hours that have been spent, been used additionally.
What the task review did was identify the exact number of staff that would be required to deliver each task within each of the 14 prisons. It was done internally. There was an internal review team. I think it had some external consultancy assistance, but it was an internal staffing review. And then the review, was the findings of the actual task review then formed the basis for the negotiations that underpinned the eventual agreement.
Can you just tell me a bit about this annualised hours agreement? So what did that deliver?
Well, what it delivered was, it delivered the delivery of the prison system.
Where's the flexibility, though, if you like? I mean, what?
The flexibility is that you have the additional hours, which every officer, and indeed other ranks as well. There are 4 bands, as I was explaining earlier, from 0. Some officers opted for 0 band. There was a facility, if you didn't want to work any additional hours, you could opt into a 0 band, which meant you didn't get the additional hours, right up to 360. And there was a total budget. I mean, I could give you the figure for the existing total budget on the of additional hours in a year. Do we have them there? The current, we'll dig them out for you. What is it?
Additional hours?
Yeah, that's the cost, the 33 million. I'm talking about the number of hours. We can get you the number of hours, but that's the flexibility. You had 33 million worth of hours that could be deployed to cover.
How do you use the staff? It's a 24/7 job because it has to be. So do people do rotating 8-hour shifts? Is that how it works? Or?
No, they don't. They do. There's a 7-day liability. There is a mixture of 7-day liability and 5-day liability, and some of the shifts are 8 to 8, and some of them are 8 to 5, and there are shifts in between to cover peak demands at certain times. Then you have the night duties, and because you don't obviously need the same number of staff on duty in a prison at night as you do in the day, and you don't need the same amount of staff on duty at all times during the day.
The 2005 agreement allowed you to, basically roster staff as you needed to.
Yeah, and the additional hours on top of the core hours that staff would have to work gave you the flexibility to cover, if you like, the gaps that previously would have been covered by overtime.
Okay. So, I mean, would it work then that someone might, work 1 week on, 1 week off, or how would you deploy the people that you had? I mean, how does this? I'm trying to get an idea of how this. No one can go in wanting to be a prison officer expecting to have a 9-to-5 job, obviously, because they know that it's not that kind of a job or a system or a service.
I mean, some of the rosters are from 8 to 5, because, like, for example, there would be particular tasks in the prison where, say the officer in charge of the school. The school is only open the 5 days a week, the same way as normal schools are. So what you don't want in certain tasks are officers that might be there on a Monday and Tuesday but would only be there again on a Friday, working in particular areas where it's more beneficial to have them there Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday and Thursday. Whereas other tasks the more basic disciplinary tasks have to be covered right throughout that period. In other words, the officers working on the landings, the officers working on, gates, escort duties, that sort of thing. There would be a requirement for them to work the normal shift pattern that the bulk of the officers work.
So the flexibility that you have now, post-2005, with the new arrangements with the annualised hours and the additional hours payment means that effectively you can deploy staff as you need to, without any additional payments.
That's right. Yeah, there's no overtime additional payments over and above the amount that's allocated for the additional hours are gone completely, and that's where the saving came from. That's the 30 million on an ongoing basis. I mean, the only better way you could have dealt with it was to reduce it even more. But as I said earlier on, a 50% reduction in a payment like that is a pretty good outcome in terms of any reorganisation.
You also could have hired more people as well into the service.
Sorry?
You also could have hired more people into the service as well.
You might have got some. You couldn't have delivered getting rid of the overtime simply by hiring more people. But I mean, there could have been. You possibly could have worked out a different balance in terms of additional staff and less additional hours.
Just almost to conclude, Chair, just in relation to the pay rates, and then taking on top of the allowances and the average kind of pay in the prison service, the midpoint on the scale for a prison officer is about 35,500 euro, just according to a note I have here. But when you take on the universal allowances for the annualised hours and everything else that came in 2005, the average pay of a prison officer is more in the region of 62,000 euro.
That's right across the board.
Yeah. When you say right across the board,
that figure would cover everyone from a basic grade prison officer right up to the most senior governor. That's right, isn't it?
Well, the average pay of a prison officer is 62,000 when you take in the different payments coming under the different allowances to them on top of the midpoint in the scale.
The average pay, including allowances for a basic grade officer, comes up to around the 60,000 mark. Yeah.
And do you have any comparison as to whether that's, fair, or in relation to other countries, or in terms of a pay when you take into allowances, that as an average pay, is that normal? Is it excessive? Is it too low?
It's we covered some of this ground earlier on. I think the rates in comparison to other countries are relatively, they're higher than some and perhaps not as high as others. But by and large, I think prison officers in Ireland are well paid. It is a reflection of the nature of the job they do. It's not a job that everyone would want to do or could do.
And it's a very important job, obviously.
Yes.
And you have to reflect that in the pay and in the conditions of employment as well. For the people who do it, it's a stressful job. There are huge demands. It's not necessarily something you can leave in the workplace. Things that you will have experienced in your day will come home with you. That happens. But I'm just interested in getting comparisons with other countries in the, say, OECD or in the European Union, because there is comparisons there in the type of work that is performed. There might be differences in the hours that are worked or other things, but you could still work out whether or not that is, an acceptable average pay for a prison officer. And I think that's work that we really need to do, even just to defend the integrity of the pay system that we have, so that it does stand up, so that you can say, no, this is fair, because we've checked it out with these 12 other countries that are in some way comparable. We've taken in the different, the differences that might apply to the different systems, and we've averaged that out, and we've found that, yes, this does stand up.
It's difficult and I think this was said earlier on, that it's difficult to make direct comparisons because there are different structures, different rostering systems, different levels of duty in different systems.
Because surely, if you look at the UK,
you can make a broad sweep in terms of identifying what the average pay here compared to Northern Ireland, compared to the UK, compared to Sweden, compared to Norway, whatever.
We really need to do that work, don't we?
Well, we could, I mean, that
We
can,
do. I mean, I think not just here. I think in every aspect of the public sector, we need to make sure that the pay is fair, and that so that you can't have it going either way in the media or in public commentary. People are getting paid too much or getting paid too little. That we will actually know, and that we'll be confident in the figures that we're paying out. I mean, €62,000 is a good salary. It's more than a pilot makes, and they have to work incredibly irregular hours, for example. It's a stressful job. You have a huge amount of responsibility in that job. You know, you have the lives of people on every flight that you take. And you have to do a huge amount of training, and it's very expensive, and it takes a number of years. And when I compare those two salaries, it just seems that then seems excessive. But we've got nothing to properly benchmark it against. So I think it's important across the public sector that we really do that job and do it rigorously and thoroughly, so we can stand over these payments when you take into account allowances that clearly should be core pay, as we've identified here, I think, and then taking them on top of core pay, and then what that actually is giving you. Does that stand up as a figure? I think that work should be done, but I'll leave it on that. Yeah, thank you.